Imagine living in a world where the air feels heavy with fear, streets are eerily quiet, and the once bustling villages are now dotted with mass graves. This was Europe in 1348, a time when an invisible enemy swept across the continent with devastating speed and impact. Welcome to Brit Bias, where today we're unraveling one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Black Death, a plague that not only wiped out millions but forever altered the course of civilization. To understand the story of the Black Death, we need to go back to its origins. It's widely believed that the plague began in Central Asia, a region crisscrossed by trade routes like the Silk Road. For centuries, these routes carried goods, ideas, and cultures across continents, but in the mid-14th century, they also became the pathway for a deadly pathogen. The bacterium Yersinia pestis found a host in fleas, which in turn traveled on black rats. These rats thrived on ships and in the crowded marketplaces of medieval towns, ensuring that the plague could spread rapidly. By 1347, the disease reached Europe, arriving at the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. From there, it spread relentlessly, moving inland along trade routes and infecting towns and villages at an alarming rate. By 1348, the Black Death had reached England. It arrived through ships docking at major ports like Weymouth and Bristol, and within months, it had spread across the country. No one was safe, and no corner of society was spared. The symptoms of the plague were as terrifying as its spread. It began innocently enough, with the fever and chills, but soon the victim would develop painful, swollen lymph nodes, known as BOS. These swellings, often blackened and filled with pus, were a hallmark of the disease. Victims suffered intense pain, vomiting, and bleeding under the skin, which caused dark blotches to appear. Death usually came within 3 to 5 days, and the chances of survival were slim. The speed and scale of the outbreak overwhelmed communities. In villages and towns, people fell ill so quickly that there weren't enough healthy individuals left to care for the sick or bury the dead. Bodies piled up in the streets, and mass graves became a grim necessity. The sight of death was everywhere, and it became clear to everyone that this was no ordinary illness. At the time, medical knowledge was rudimentary. The concept of germs and bacteria wouldn't be understood for centuries. Instead, people blamed the plague on a variety of causes, from miasma, or bad air, to divine punishment for humanity's sins. Plague doctors, with their long, bird-like masks, attempted to treat the sick by filling the mask's beak with aromatic herbs to ward off the bad air. They used crude methods like bloodletting and lancing the bows, but these treatments were largely ineffective. The mask itself became an enduring symbol of the era, a blend of desperation and futility. In their search for answers, some turned to religion for solace, while others turned on their neighbors. Groups of religious zealots known as flagellants paraded through towns, whipping themselves in an effort to atone for the sins of humanity. Meanwhile, marginalized communities, particularly Jewish people, were often scapegoated. Accusations of well poisoning and other baseless conspiracies led to horrific acts of violence, as fear and paranoia gripped the population. The scale of death was staggering. Historians estimate that the Black Death killed between 25 million and 50 million people in Europe, wiping out 30% to 60% of the population. In England alone, entire villages were abandoned, their residents either dead or fled. The labor force was decimated, leading to a collapse in agriculture and food shortages. Families were torn apart, and society as a whole seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Yet, out of this immense tragedy, profound changes began to take shape. The drastic reduction in population disrupted the rigid structures of medieval society. With fewer workers available, laborers found themselves in higher demand, which allowed them to demand better wages and living conditions. This shift weakened the feudal system, paving the way for the rise of a more modern economy. The scarcity of labor also spurred innovations in farming and industry as communities sought ways to do more with less. The Black Death also left a mark on culture and thought. The trauma of the plague led to an increased focus on mortality in art and literature. Grim depictions of death and the afterlife became common themes, reflecting the collective psyche of a population grappling with loss. At the same time, the experience of surviving such a calamity fostered resilience and adaptability. In the centuries that followed, the lessons of the Black Death influenced advancements in public health and medicine. Quarantine practices, which were first introduced during the plague, became a cornerstone of disease prevention. Cities began to invest in sanitation and infrastructure, laying the groundwork for the modern understanding of hygiene and public health. The Black Death was one of the darkest periods in history, but it also became a turning point, a force that reshaped economies, societies, and even ways of thinking. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of humanity. Though it left devastation in its wake, it also sowed the seeds for a new world, one that would rise from the ashes of the old. Thanks for tuning into BritBuzz, where we uncover the stories that shaped our world. If you found this dive into history fascinating, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Let us know what topic you'd like us to explore next. And as always, stay curious.